Oh, here we go. Thomas and Friends Season 12 first premiered in September 2008 in the United Kingdom. It was narrated by Michael Angeles in the UK and Michael Brandon in the US. It was also the first animated CGI live action hybrid. Hit Entertainment was reportedly keen on producing more CGI live action hybrids, but plans fell through because of, you guessed it, money. There wasn't enough finance. This was during the time of the global financial crisis, and budgets naturally took a hit. The characters' faces were animated using a mixture of CGI and motion capture animation. The physical models were replaced by a white triangle where the faces should be, and they would fit them in post-production. The resin faces were only used in background shots or any scenes that they found it difficult to animate. Vehicles were given the CGI treatment, as well as the human characters, such as Sir Topham Hatt, Lady Hatt, you get the idea. Pierce Brosnan was originally meant to return for this series after his very successful stint in The Great Discovery, but for reasons unknown, it was Angeles and Brandon that reprised the roles. This was also the last series to have the original models used before the switch to full CGI animation. It makes it quite an interesting series to watch from a visual perspective. You can tell they were just trying to experiment because it was a little bit jarring when you've seen the CGI faces. And I do believe that if they had the budget, they would have been able to get these little tweaks down and actually make a decent hybrid series. There's only 20 episodes in this season, which, thankfully, a bit of a godsend, as the season majorly sucked. There were some good episodes, but man, I found this very hard to sit through. I originally was going to ask my kids to join me watching this series, since it was the last hurrah of the model era. They got 2 episodes in and bailed out, and in all honesty, I couldn't blame them. This was meant to be a swan song of the model era, kind of what I imagined Season 7 should have been before Hit Entertainment took over. And while there were some things that I really enjoyed about it, there was a lot that I didn't. But this ranking video is going to be a little bit different than all the other ones that I've done in the past. Normally, I do a top 10 best list and a top 10 worst list. But with there only being 20 episodes in this series, I decided just to do a straight ranking video. Every episode from Season 12, from the worst to the best. Once again, these are my own personal opinions, and I have no doubt that your list would be different from mine. That is the one thing that makes the Thomas fandom so unique. And as always, let me know in the comments what your favourite episodes are. All I ask is that you be respectful, and above all, enjoy the video. Okay, let's dive in. Number 20. Push Me, Pull You. Scarlowe refuses help to pull a train for a puppet show, and ends up becoming a runaway engine. Oh my god, this episode infuriated me. The narrow gauge engines, particularly Scarlowe and Renee's, reduced to this childlike, jerky, jealous pieces of dog. This is the last episode for the narrow gauge engines. This was the final thing that we saw as an audience. No wonder they didn't make a return until their movie. My god, I wouldn't have had them back either. Based on these episodes, the mind boggles. I instantly thought, who in their right mind wrote... Oh wait, Sharon Miller. An atrocious episode and thoroughly deserves to be at the bottom, not just of Season 12, but potentially the worst episode of the Hit era. Number 19, Best Friends. Written by Anna Starkey, Thomas tries to avoid telling Percy he has been given a job that Percy himself wants to do. It was nice to see Neville again for one last time, but I can't believe that out of 3 seasons, Neville had a total of 3 lines, and 2 of them were saying hello in his debut episode. Ladies and gentlemen, the Hit era. Also, why was there never any mention of a best friends whistle between Thomas and Percy up to this point? Not even any subtle foreshadowing where they would have this special whistle together just as a wee inside joke that none of us seen. It just literally pops up in the final episode of the Hit era. I know this has been touched on a lot, but this episode in particular really feels like a forced friendship of Thomas and Percy. It's so cookie cutter, sweet. We're best friends and we'll always be best friends forever. We tell each other everything. And up until this point, yes, they were more friendly than they were in the classic era, but there was still some traces of who they used to be in the hit era. In a previous episode, if this situation had played out, Thomas would be so excited to get the special job over Percy, would gloat to him unintentionally, Percy's feelings would be hurt, then there'd be an apology, and everything would just go back to normal. They didn't even stick to their own formula. We saw a duck in this final episode, but this was the end of season 12, and it did not end with a bang. It ended with a whimper. Number 18, Percy and the Bandstand. Written by Paul Larson, Percy is tasked with bringing Lady Hat to a surprise party at the new Great Waterton Bandstand, but the unknowing Lady Hat tells him to go elsewhere. I don't get why Percy can't stand up to Lady Hat. He's been able to get the troublesome trucks into line at the start of this episode. It shouldn't be a problem for him. It was just generic, predictable. Lady Hat was just her usual annoying self. The positive was we got to see Jack in the pack. Well, Jack and Alfie. And Alfie didn't even have any lines of dialogue. At least we saw a CGI Miss Jenny. Number 17, The Man in the Hills. Written by Sharon Miller, it's Mr. Percival's birthday. And when Sir Handel tells Thomas about someone called the Man in the Hills, Thomas is determined to find him in order to give Mr. Percival the best birthday present. If there's one thing that I can't stand more than a bad narrow gauge story, it's Thomas being the focal point of a bad narrow gauge story. At least with Push Me Pull You, it was narrow gauge centric, even though it was absolute dog shit. But no, Thomas has to be the front and centre of this story, and at this point we're starting to get more of the rhyming speech that was due to come in the next era. They were keeping it internalised, they weren't saying it out loud at this point, but it was still a bad sign of things to come. This series also really drove home the fact that the trains seem to just drive themselves, because anytime one of the men of the hills got into Thomas's cab, there was no driver or fireman there. They weren't even on the platform to let the person in. So they're clearly just going by themselves. So much for the realism. And at the end we find out the Man in the Hills is basically just a chalk outline of a man on a hill. To me that's not marvellous. To me that's more a sign of an unsolved murder. Number 16, Don't Go Back. Written by Simon Spencer, Diesel and Thomas race backwards instead of doing their work, causing them to crash into their friends. Oh boy, this was tough to sit through. How the mighty have fallen. You think back to the classic era of Thomas and Friends, and think about what Thomas was like in the first 7 seasons, and Diesel in Series 2, even Series 7, and compare them to where they are now, like Scarlowe, just petty, jealous children. It was nice to see Mavis and Harry and Bert, even though they did absolutely nothing. And the scene where they crashed into Harry and Bert and they went through the shed was pretty cool. And by this point, all the stories were starting to blend together for me, and cameos were not enough to save this one from a higher place. Number 15, Thomas Puts the Brakes On. Written by Mark Robertson, Thomas's brakes start squeaking while he's delivering special blocks to repair the Sodor Bridge, and in doing so declines help from Stanley. Thomas goes back to type of being petty, jealous a-hole. So all that good character work from the Great Discovery was Thanos snapped. I did find it quite funny that when the special blocks fell into the river, the water was green. Sodor must definitely have a British plumbing system going on. To me this felt like one of those learning segments, but stretched out into a 7-minute episode, because we're having to try and remember where Thomas dropped all the blocks, and then we have to go back and find them. But at least it was Murdoch that was pushing Rocky, so we got to see him one last time. Number 14, Toby's Special Surprise. Written by Sharon Miller, Toby wants to make an impression by searching the railway for something special. Just like with Scarlowe, they butchered a classic character. This time, it was Toby. The Toby that we know would never be jealous of other engines getting supposed special jobs. It's not in his character. He just straight up doesn't give a f***. He would probably find it a good thing that he could just rest in his shed rather than feeling like he was being left out. And he certainly would not disobey the Fat Controller's orders by going to try and find something special to prove to him that he is. For me, this story felt like it would be more in character with Percy if it was in hit era continuity. I was glad to see Henrietta, and with that sign for the tram sheds looks great, but the story sucked. Number 13, Duncan and the Hot Air Balloon. Written by Mark Robertson, Mr. Percival's twins are getting a ride in a hot air balloon, but Duncan wants to take them for himself, just like he does every year. We see a lot of Mr. Percival's family in this season. We see his wife, we see his kids, and the fact that he's got ginger twins, massive props in my book. Even James had a hot air balloon-centric episode in season 6. No drivers or firemen in Duncan's cab, just proving that they just go on their own. They're totally sentient. Can't really say much else about it aside from it's my meh episode. Number 12, Saved You. Written by Paul Larson, Thomas wants to prove his heroism when he learns that a fireman is to be honoured, but instead he causes more trouble for his friends. Okay, good points. Duck, Donald, Douglas, Harvey, bad points. I don't like the accent that Angeles is given for Duck. Why couldn't he just go back to the season 3 type? It worked so much better. Again, a generic, predictable 3-strike formula episode, and the only reason that it's up so high is the cameos. Knowing that this is the last time that we would see characters like Duck, Donald, and Douglas for a very long time, you just take whatever scraps you can get. Number 11, Steady Eddie. Written by Sharon Miller, Edward takes a brass water wheel on the scenic route to Great Waterton to show it off to his friends, and as a result, he loses it. There's a nice bit of continuity with Edward taking the water wheel to Great Waterton. Shows that they're still doing work on Great Waterton from the Great Discovery. But again, these writers cannot write for Edward. Like Toby, he would not disobey the Fat Controller's orders by not taking the suggested routes, such as the express line. And he sure as hell wouldn't do it just so other people could see him pushing this water wheel and feel more important. That's a James trait. It was nice to see Oliver and Arthur do a wee cameo at the bottom of Gordon's Hill, although some of the scenes did seem out of sync to me because of the CGI model hybrid. Some points it just felt sped up, and then other points it felt really slowed down. There wasn't a nice steady middle ground like there's always been. And there is no way that Edward would have made it to the smelter's yard before Gordon did. No matter how many shortcuts you take. Number 10, Tram Trouble. Written by Sharon Miller, Toby and her new steam tram Flora are preparing to lead the parade at Great Waterton. But Thomas thinks that Toby would rather lead the parade on his own than with Flora. If there was ever an example that they couldn't write for female characters, this is it. I like the look of Flora. I like her design. I like her livery. I don't like the fact that she's got makeup kind of similar to Daisy with the bright rosy cheeks and the lipstick. But she barely has any involvement in the story. Doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. And then she's never seen again. Why introduce a character if you're not going to try and progress her going forward? There's a lot of people that ask about the sexism issue around Thomas and Friends and whether it's just sensationalized by media or if it actually is true. And I may do a video on that someday. This certainly didn't help their case. Number 9, Thomas and the Billboard. Written by Mark Robertson, Diesel accidentally obscures Thomas in a photograph, causing Thomas to think he did it on purpose. Originally I had this one a lot lower down the card. I mean, it's about a billboard. Doesn't really seem like there's much going on. When I started thinking about it a bit more, and the more it started to climb up in my rankings. For starters, it is nice to see that Diesel is not the antagonist here. He didn't do anything wrong. He just did what the photographer told him to do. Move forward. Then he took the picture. Why don't get is why he was at Tidmouth Sheds in the first place. He's hard lever there. And you would think if they were getting a billboard, they wouldn't have diesels in it, because it's the steam engines that are the big attraction. Even if they did want a diesel engine in it, they could have had Salty, Mavis. They were bringing characters back. They could even brought back Boko. You know, a character that has positive attributes, because this time Diesel didn't have any. But overall, I thought the episode was actually okay. And there are also not one, but 2 instances of hoarding in this episode. And we all love a bit of hoarding. Number 8, The Party Surprise. Written by Simon Spencer, Freddy decides to reorganise the Christmas party from Mr. Percival's house to the wharf as a surprise for Colin the Crane. I have a feeling that Colin the Crane was essentially meant to be their narrow gauge version of Cranky, but just bland, generic, and not cranky. We're told that Colin and Freddy are great friends, yet we've never seen Colin at any point, and there's been no interaction at all with any of them. Freddy's motives were just, but the way he went about it was just so dumb. We're 4 seasons into the hit era, and they still haven't learned their lesson. Older characters in this series are meant to be wise and revered, not dumbasses. And of course, at the very end, Thomas inevitably has to be there. But overall, I did think that the episode wasn't too bad. And again, we got introduced to some of Mr. Percival's family. Number 7, Henry Gets It Wrong. Written by Abby Grant, Henry worries that the workmen are going to cut down the wishing tree, so he blocks the tracks, only to find out that they're actually coming to save the tree. There's a lot of inconsistencies during the hit era, but the one thing they really stuck with was the fact that Henry was an eco-warrior. I know that it's another episode about that bloody wishing tree, and sometimes Angelise's voiceover work of Henry does feel a little bit off, but I do like the fact that he does go full-blown eco-warrior to try and save this tree. Although I'm pretty sure the Reverend W. Audrey would be spinning in his grave with all the rolling stock that's blocking the tracks. He went nuts about Rule 55. Again, it's your kind of generic misunderstanding story, but it does lead to a good resolution in the end. Number 6, Rosie's Fun Fair Special. Written by Andrew Viner, Rosie and Emily are pulling a train for the fun fair, but Rosie wants to pull it alone. I think the pairing of Rosie and Emily could have been a really good pairing going forward. Rosie is still a blank slate and in need of guidance and nurturing, and I think Emily could have been that mentor-style figure. Also would have helped us push 2 female characters into prominent lead roles. Sadly, that just wasn't the case then, and it really showed. I love the fact there's a cameo from Bertie, and seeing Stepney was just brilliant, but he had no lines. He got hit by a truck full of pink sugar, and that's the last time you see him, ever, and that broke my heart. If it wasn't for Stepney, I probably would have put this a bit lower down, I'm not going to lie. But I did see potential with the Rosie-Emily pairing. Again, I just wish they'd done more with it. Number 5, Mountain Marvel. Written by Sharon Miller, Peter Sam is about to hear a tale about Proteus from the famous author Miss Marvel, but finds a statue of the magical engine himself. He wants the statue to be a wonderful surprise, but ends up carrying too much, and things go wrong. I was really hoping that they would expand on the lore of Proteus in this episode. Maybe we would have got to hear the story that Miss Marvel said. Also, Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan is in the Thomas and Friends multiverse. There's a crossover. I do like that Peter Sam found the statue, but those cream churns should have really spilled when he crashed into the statue, not later on in the episode. I get why, but at least some of the cream churns should have fell off the flatbed when there was the crash. It's always nice to see Mighty Mac, and good to see Freddy. The one thing I've noticed a lot when I'm watching Freddy's episodes, what is his accent meant to be? I think Angelise was going for Irish, but that does not sound Irish to me. It was a simple story, but effective. And that's about all we can ask for now. Number 4, Heave Ho Thomas. Written by Sharon Miller, a large new engine called Hank arrives on the island, but Thomas is determined to prove how strong he is. How can Sharon Miller do so well with introducing one character, such as Hank, and do so badly introducing another character, such as Flora? Hank's built up quite well in this. I love his design, I love his livery. He's got a hell of a lot more lines than Flora did, and he actually does something in this episode. And I do like that when we first meet Hank, he's got a very American "Oh Sing Can You See" type of anthem when we first see him, as if to just really drive home the point that he is American. And then you hear Angelise's American accent, and while not the worst, there was certainly room for improvement. The story trait is quite similar. Thomas is rude to a new engine, but a little bit racist, there's more rhyming, and once again a 3 strikes formula, but it was a good intro for Hank. And again, we saw Horden. Number 3, Gordon Takes a Shortcut. Written by Wayne Jackman, Gordon wants to collect some VIPs from Great Waterton, but in order to arrive there first, he decides to take a shortcut. What I love about this episode is that if you look hard enough online, you actually get to hear one of the Pierce Brosnan original narrations from this episode. I really like that. It's a little bit of a what if kind of deal, if Pierce Brosnan had actually stuck around. Again, I think there was potential with a Gordon and Stanley pairing. Newer engine, wise old engine, having this whole kind of rivalry and then becoming friends. Felt very Thomas and Gordon-esque, or at least it could have been. Another good Duck cameo, an Oliver and Toad cameo, a good crash scene with Gordon and Ben, sans Bill, and for this series, it's not a bad episode. They don't really seem to have a bad Gordon episode in their locker of the hit era. I like that. I respect it. Number 2, Excellent Emily. Written by Paul Larson, when Emily is praised that she is excellent, she ignores her friend's advice, causing her to end up stranded in muddy water. Oh, this episode was a banger in this series. We actually get a decent bit of character development with Emily in this. She starts off having a bit of an ego trip because she gets called excellent, ignores her friend's advice, suffers as a result, and learns and grows. I think there's more character development in this episode and the episode that's to come on my list than there was in the rest of the series. And the cameos, oh my god, the cameos! The first time seeing duckbacks in season 7, I legitimately cheered. And then in the very next scene, you see Bulgy in the background. Bulgy! And Murdoch has a prominent role in it. And then there's Trevor, there's Harvey, there's Jeremy. So many cameos. This is what I wanted to see for the last series of the model era. This is what I wanted to see in Calling All Engines. So many cameos. And the fact that the story did not entirely suck was even better. Everything just seemed to work for this. Like, the autumn setting was really nice. Some of the effects were really strong. The music was great. Top marks. What can I say? And the number 1 episode of Thomas and Friends, Series 12, is James Works It Out. Written by Simon Spencer. When James ignores Hector's advice, he gets caught in a snowstorm. Now, this was a pairing that I didn't expect to want more of, and now I really, really wish that we had it. James and Hector. Such a great combination. James is stubborn, egotistical, hot-headed. Hector is more calm, concerned, logical. And the fact that Hector's a truck and James is an engine, there's a good bit of that racial kind of stereotyping going on there. James doesn't like being told what to do, especially by someone that he sees as inferior to him. A truck. Trucks are things that they push and pull. They're silly. They cause trouble. Hence the name Troublesome Trucks. They make fun of the engine. They seem to have an eternal death wish. They're generally seen as beneath the engines. Yet here's Hector, someone who is an antagonist in the last series. We got some decent character development with him, found out he was more of a gentle giant, and then they continue to build on Hector in this episode. There's always a running stereotype that James has a prejudice against diesels, and while that may be true, it just shows that it's not just diesels that he has a prejudice against. He has a prejudice against anything that's not like him. Not a big fan of buses, didn't like the lorries, didn't like Boko, and didn't like Hector. But when James absolutely messes up because he didn't listen to Hector's advice, he's humbled and has to listen to Hector to get out of the situation that they're in. And at the end, he comes to respect him. I genuinely do think that James is a bit of a bawbag. And again, I'm going to touch on that one day. But what a lot of people don't realise is when I call a character in Thomas a bawbag, it's not just that they have negative personality traits and I don't like them. It's because they have negative personality traits and learn and grow from them that make a character what they are. I much prefer this James, who's a bit of a prick but has layers to him, than your generalised, flanderised version of James that we get later on down the line. Great character dynamic, great story, and by far the best episode of Thomas and Friends Series 12. So that's my list on Thomas and Friends Series 12. What's your favourite episode of the series? Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on chugging.